After struggling to sell her cosmetic products to her neighbors in a small town, a woman named Peg decides to go to a strange house at the top of a hill. As she gets there, she realizes that the compound is really big, and even though no one lets her in, she enters the main house. She looks around for a while and tries to find someone to buy her products, but she doesn't see anyone in the house. Despite this, Peg still keeps looking, and as she gets to the top floor, she sees a guy named Edward. As he approaches her, Peg sees that Edward has several pairs of scissors with him. She thinks he's going to harm her, so she tells him to stay back. However, after a while, she sees that the scissors are his hands. It then turns out that the house belongs to an inventor who created Edward and gave him Scissorhands. Peg then gets calmer with Edward and she asks about the inventor. Edward then says that the man is dead and he's the only one who has been in the building for a very long time. Peg feels sorry for him, and after helping him clean the cuts on his face, she decides to take him to her house. On their way through town, Edward looks excited to be out of the inventor's house for the first time. While they're heading to Peg's house, some of her neighbors also see her, and they look shocked to see that she has brought someone new to town. One of the ladies, Marge, immediately informs some other women about Peg's guest, and they all seem nosy and very interested in meeting him. Meanwhile, Peg arrives home with Edward, and as they enter the house, he looks at her family pictures. Just then, she shows him pictures of her husband, Bill, as well as that of her kids, Kim and Kevin. After seeing Kim, Edward thinks she's really beautiful, and he can't take his eyes off her picture for a while. Shortly after, Peg gives him some new clothes to wear and tells him that he can stay in Kim's room for the meantime because she's currently on a camping trip with friends. As she then leaves him to take a call, Edward struggles to wear his clothes, and Peg eventually comes back to help him. Following this, she then decides to use her cosmetic products on him so he can look better. She also mentions that his scissor hands don't have to be like that forever because she has a doctor friend who might be interested in his case. While Peg then works on Edward's face, some of her neighbors start to gather in front of the house, hoping to find out more about the mystery guest. Later that night, Bill returns home with Kevin, and while they're having dinner with Peg and Edward, they look shocked to see his hands. As Edward also struggles with his food, Kevin can't help but stare, but Peg tells him to stop doing that. He, however, can't bring himself to stop, and he even asks Peg if he can take Edward to a show and tell event in his school. Peg disagrees with this, and Kevin looks slightly disappointed. While at the table, Bill also tries to engage in a conversation with Edward about his past, but Peg says he has to take things slowly with their guest. After dinner, Peg then ensures that Edward goes to bed, saying that even though things seem tough at first, he'll eventually pull through. The next morning after he wakes up, Peg continues her experiment on Edward's face. When she's through, she then checks her voicemail, only to notice that Marge and the other neighbors have sent several messages asking her to introduce Edward to them. Meanwhile, Edward sees Bill trimming the flowers in the house, so he copies him. However, Edward does an even better job by trimming the flower to look like Peg and her family. Bill looks really happy to see this, and he eventually gets to rest. Not long after, a lady named Esmeralda enters the compound and accuses Edward of being an evil person sent from hell to torture the town. She seems very sure of what she's saying, and she even avoids letting him come close to her. As she leaves, Bill then tells Edward not to worry about Esmeralda, who he says is mentally unstable. Later that day, some of Peg's neighbors, led by Marge and a woman named Joyce, visit her to see if they can finally meet the guest. Peg says things are still quite busy for her and that she'll let them see Edward later. However, Joyce and the other women tell her to organize a party so that everyone can meet Edward. Even though Peg is not interested, Joyce gets her to agree to the plan. As they're talking, Esmeralda shows up and tries to get all the women to believe that Edward is evil, but none of them listen to her. Later that day, Peg starts working with Edward to prepare something for his welcome party. As he injures himself while helping her, Peg cleans the wound and also tells him that he doesn't have to be nervous at the party. While Edward then watches her cooking, he remembers how his inventor used to make cookies using his multi-system equipment. Shortly after, everyone in the neighborhood arrives for the party, and they all look surprised to see Edward's hands. Despite this, Joyce still introduces herself to him, and she also seems pretty seductive as she offers him a meal she prepared for the party. All the other women also come over to feed Edward what they cooked, and this makes Joyce jealous. That night, when Edward is about to sleep, he remembers how his inventor created him and also started teaching him several things through books. While he's then asleep, Kim arrives from her camping trip with a group of friends, including her boyfriend, Jim. As she says goodbye to them, she heads into the house and immediately enters her room. Even though she's initially unaware that someone is on her bed, she eventually freaks out when she sees Edward. This alerts Bill and Peg, who realize that their daughter is back home. While Bill then gets Edward a good place to sleep, Peg tells Kim that she has to be nice to their guest. Shortly after, she then takes Kim to introduce herself to Edward properly. The next day, Edward starts helping people in the neighborhood with trimming their flowers. Later that day, he also goes to Kevin's school for the show and tell event, where he shows how good he is with his scissors. Later that day, Jim and Kim's other friend, Suzanne, join the family for dinner. While they're then eating, they see Edward struggling with his food. As he also tries to serve Suzanne, she says she's not interested because she's not sure Edward's scissor hands are safe enough to touch food. Shortly after, Bill asks Edward why he doesn't charge anyone for his gardening services. Peg doesn't think it's important, but Bill says that Edward needs to start charging people for whatever he helps them with. The next day, while working for another neighbor, Edward sees the woman's dog and helps her trim its hair. The woman is left impressed, and because of this, Peg helps Edward set up a business to help people in the neighborhood with trimming their dog's hair. After doing another excellent job with Joyce's dog, Joyce asks if he can style her hair too. Even though he hasn't done it before, Edward helps Joyce style her hair in a way she loves. Other clients soon ask for his help with their hair, and he renders his services to them. The next day, Edward then goes to the city with one of the women in the town named Helen, who offers to help him get his blades sharpened. Before he gets this done, Edward sees Kim hanging out with Jim, and he looks jealous. When he returns home, he sees Kim and Jim looking for the house key. She asks if he has one, but he says he doesn't have a key to the house. However, he uses his Scissorhands to unlock the door, and Kim looks relieved to finally enter the house. Meanwhile, Jim only looks impressed to see that Edward doesn't need a key to open the door. The next day, Edward is invited to a TV show along with Peg. There, he is asked several questions about his hands and if he'll ever consider getting prosthetic hands. Edward says he doesn't feel bad about his hands and that he's open to seeing a doctor anytime. Suddenly, one of the audience members asks Edward if he's in love with anyone, but he remains silent. Kim also watches this from the house, and as she hears the question, she anticipates Edward's answer. However, just as he's about to give his answer, Edward almost gets electrocuted when his scissor hands touch one of the recording devices. Jim laughs at Edward and says it's funny, but Kim doesn't think the same thing because Edward could have been seriously hurt. The next day, Joyce takes Edward to a salon she's planning to open for him. As she shows him around, she takes him to an inner room where she tries to seduce him, but he leaves her and runs away. He then meets with Peg and her family. After talking about the salon Joyce wants to get for him, Bill commends Edward for being serious with his talents. He then tells Edward to proceed to the bank next to get a loan that can help him start the business on a full scale. Following this, Edward and Peg go to the bank together, and even though they try to convince the manager with everything they've got, he rejects their request for a loan. Meanwhile, Jim tells Kim to help him convince Edward to come with them to break into his house to steal something from his father's secret room. Kim doesn't think it's a good idea, but he says that they won't get into any trouble. He also tells her that Edward doesn't have to know that it's his house they're breaking into. That night, Kim gets Edward on board with the plan, and things appear to go well. However, Edward gets stuck in one of the rooms, and as it triggers an alarm to the cops, Jim immediately escapes and takes Kim with him. Kim is unhappy with this, and she tells Jim to take her back, but he says he's not ready to risk getting caught. Meanwhile, the police soon arrive, and Edward is caught for breaking into someone's house. While he's in custody, Peg and Bill come over to see him, and even though they think he really broke into the house to steal some money, Edward doesn't tell the truth because it will put Kim in trouble. The case eventually gets dismissed because the judge thinks Edward's years of being lonely have made him slightly mentally unstable. As he returns home, there are reporters waiting for him, but Peg handles them. Shortly after, Edward meets with Kim, and she says sorry for ditching him at the house. She also mentions that she wanted to come back, but Jim didn't let her. As she asks if he knows who owns the house they broke into, Edward says he always knew it was Jim's house, but that he only agreed to break in because she asked. Just then, Jim shows up at the house, and Kim has to go see him. Edward looks angry to see Jim, and he shows his frustration by using his blades to tear the wallpaper in the bathroom. Meanwhile, Kim tells Jim to report himself for the crime so that everyone can know that Edward didn't mean to break into the apartment. However, Jim says he's not doing that, and this gets Kim angry, so she walks away. Later that day, Bill scolds Edward for what he did, and as he tries to teach him to differentiate between right and wrong, Kim interrupts them, saying that their guest doesn't need such lessons. As they then argue about it, Peg has to get them to stop. Meanwhile, all the women in the neighborhood are already against Edward because Joyce lied to them that he tried to rape her. Edward doesn't seem to like how things are going for himself. And later that night, while Peg and Kim are setting up their Christmas tree, he makes an ice sculpture with his blades. Kim sees this, and she looks happy to see that it's also causing snow to fall. Out of nowhere, Jim shows up and startles them, so Edward unknowingly injures Kim's palm. While Peg takes Kim inside to take care of the wound, Jim yells at Edward to leave, and he then walks away angrily as he also cuts the flower sculptures in some houses. Some of the neighbors see this, and they immediately decide to call the police. Meanwhile, Kim confronts Jim about sending Edward away. However, he doesn't seem to get this because he is only trying to protect her. Kim doesn't seem to care, and she tells him to leave. As she then wonders where Edward might have gone, a police officer shows up at their house asking for Edward. Peg doesn't say anything, so the officer realizes that Edward is not inside, so he says he'll head out to look for the boy. Peg and Kim then look sad because Edward could get arrested again. Peg then mentions that it might be best for Edward to return to his old house because he'll be safe there. Shortly after, Peg heads out with Bill to find Edward. Just then, Edward returns home and sees only Kim around. She looks relieved to see him, and she adds that she's happy he's okay. She then tells him to hug her, and just as he hesitates, she hugs him instead. At this point, he then remembers how he killed his inventor on the day he got him new hands. Elsewhere, Jim has already gotten into one of his friend's van, and he starts making plans to hurt Edward. Just as his friend then drives recklessly towards the house, Edward comes out and sees that the van is about to hit Kevin. He saves Kevin, but while trying to check if the boy is fine, he uses his blade to hurt him. While everyone in the neighborhood is against him and trying to get him off Kevin because they think he's deliberately hurting the boy, Bill and Peg arrive right on time. After taking Kevin away, they tell Edward to come into the house, but before he can do anything, Jim attacks him. Edward eventually cuts Jim in his arm, and just as the police officer gets closer to the scene, Kim tells him to run away. He takes her advice, but as he runs, the police officer and the people in the town chase after him. Luckily, Edward returns to his old house, and while he's in there, Kim comes to see him. As they talk about what he has to do since the police and town members are still after him, Jim shows up with a gun. He attacks Edward and tries beating him up, but Kim helps in hurting Jim. As he then gets angry and pushes Kim away, Edward doesn't like this, and he proceeds to stab Jim before pushing him down the building. Jim dies instantly, and as he sees this, Edward tells Kim that she has to leave. She agrees to do this, but before she leaves, she tells him that she loves him. She then heads down while holding a spare piece of Edward's hands. As she meets her neighbors, who have now seen Jim's dead body, Kim tells them that Edward is also dead and that he and Jim killed each other. To make them believe this, she then shows them the spare piece of Edward's hands. Following this, they all leave the house. Many years later, Kim narrates this story to her granddaughter, and she says that no one saw Edward after that day. As her granddaughter then asks if Edward is still alive, she says she doesn't know and that she prefers it that way because she doesn't want him to see her looking old. She, however, mentions that the snow reminds her of him. Just then, Edward is seen in his house making some ice sculptures, which causes snow to start spreading around the town.